So, what's a YIMBY?
A YIMBY is a luxury condo activist. It's a fake. It's a what they call astroturf. You know, like what grassroots is. Like grassroots is like a collective, sort of from the ground up type of community-based thing. Astroturfing is when financial interests attempt to create a kind of the appearance of a grassroots movement.
What are some of the examples of that around San Francisco currently?
Of fake grassroots movements? I don't know the whole history of that. I mean, it's been going on for a long time. It also gets kind of tricky because like when you're because sort of like when you're talking about like sort of professionalized activism, it creates a kind of really sort of porous and kind of weird category where like I don't know. You could say that like, well, I mean, they've existed side by side for a long time. Like sort of professionalized activists and sort of things that are completely, you know, manufactured by like a moneyed interest. But the YIMBY is kind of unusual because it's just really stark, and the amount of money, sort of real estate money that has gone into creating this thing has been massive. And basically what you do is like, say in municipalities where like a lot of decision making about governance has to include some level of community input, like a public comment, you know, and people are allowed to sort of say what they want. What an astroturfed project or whatever will attempt to do will basically pay people to sort of show up and be like, I really like this thing XYZ. A really good example of this was, people know the Monster and the Mission. There was like this developer, I forget the name of the developer now, but they were attempting to build like basically they wanted to clear cut a section of a block next to public transit, the BART station, and they wanted to build luxury condos there. Which is also kind of funny for another reason, because people who tend to live in luxury condos don't take public transit. Like they go everywhere, like they Uber everywhere. They mostly ride share, so they don't do. So it's like one of the many YIMBY myths is that you need to build luxury condos near public transit because the people who buy them will move in there. And then also we're seeing increasingly is that like a lot of the luxury units sit empty, and they become like sort of part of an investment portfolio of like just like some sort of international, like people who aren't even in the fucking city. But anyway, so like what happened with that thing, and we all saw it, there was like so people did a lot of organizing. There was like a lot of sort of anti-displacement organizing, community organizers that pushed the developer that was proposing the Monster and the Mission, which would have been this massive, huge, it would have been like one of the largest luxury condo developments in the Mission. In the Mission in San Francisco, in the Mission District. What happened is that people organized and then forced the planning committee, the planning commission, the San Francisco Planning Board, to have a public hearing about this thing. It is pretty interesting. So there was this group that was called Mission for All. Was that what it was called? It was basically the developer was paying Mission High students to come out and say that they wanted this thing to happen. I mean, there was like numerous things that happened around this particular thing, around the Monster and the Mission. There was also there's like an advertising campaign that was inside the BART where they hired actors to pretend to be like bus drivers and janitors and school teachers, and to be like, you know, like quoted as saying that they supported having this sort of thing happen. So like all this happens, all of this is happening because of the YIMBY movement, and the YIMBYs are just pro luxury, like they just want to build everything, like regardless of what it is. And the fact of the reality is, and that we're seeing this more and more, particularly now that tech is gone, is that we don't have a housing crisis. There's more than enough space for people to live. There's like, particularly like apartments, there's like vacancies. There's like mass vacancies all throughout the city, particularly in the financial district with like a lot of, or Union Square, with like a lot of tourist hotels are just sitting empty. Like high rises have been sitting empty. There's like buildings. There's just like we don't need more housing. But the thing is that YIMBYs think that. Well, YIMBYs don't think. YIMBYs actually represent like major real estate interests who have an investment like in contracting. Like actually one of the most conservative pro YIMBY kind of groups are like a lot of the building trades, because they get money off of building shit and they just constantly building, like they don't care. And so they're just building all these things that, and also it's like the worst thing for the environment is to continue to keep on building things and building things. But anyway, but like to sort of go back to the Mission High School thing, so what happened is that they were basically like bussing in people to come say that they were in support of, and like people had like footage, they would see like these limousine buses pulling up full of folks and then dropping them off in front of Mission High School to go in and testify and claim that they testify, whatever, like make a public comment basically to the effect that they really wanted this housing here. It got really out of control, and it super exposed how desperate they were. And then it was fought against, and they shut it down. It's really interesting because the city just in general was super expectant for this thing to get built. And so like, the Walgreens is gone. It was right where the Walgreens was, right by the
BART station.
The BART station. So the Walgreens is gone, the fucking Burger King is gone. And it's just, because they all thought that this thing, and I don't know if they had plans to like, move in once this thing was constructed, but it's not been constructed. And I think San Francisco is really unique in terms of its ability to mobilize. Like a lot of groups being able to mobilize folks to come out, and like a lot of people did a bunch of work to make this happen. And it's been, to my understanding, it's been dropped, it's been delayed, but then there's all kinds of other weird deals that happen. Like I think that people got something to build, I don't know. Basically YIMBYism is sort of like a kind of, it's like lobbying / a weird attempt to kind of hijack a lot of anti-displacement organizing over the years and make it seem like it's part of it, where actually is working against it. It's really, because it seems like it plays into a kind of common sense that like, oh, it's sort of like supply side economics, like, oh, well, there's not enough housing, there's people who are unhoused, we just got to build more. The YIMBYs are never out in front trying to get people off the streets into any of these things that are being built. Like that's the thing that's happening. It's just like, well, it's like any sort of capitalist thing. Like you always are overproduction. Like overproduction is the reality. Things are continually being overproduced. And in order to have a market that's competitive, they have to always be creating like fake shortages and making things go away. And so there's this fake notion of scarcity around housing. There's not a scarcity around housing. But nevertheless, they're continuing to build things. They're continuing to tear things down. What's kind of interesting, London Breed, who's the mayor, he's like a super YIMBY, grew up allegedly in these projects in the Lower Haight. And the projects were rebuilt like maybe 15 years ago, maybe no more than 15 years ago. They were rebuilt. And so a bunch of the people, and it's like mostly black folks living there. We have a black woman who's a mayor. So like a lot of black folks living in these projects, and they've been complaining because they were shitty projects. And so like what happened was the original contractor got another massive contract from San Francisco to rebuild the same projects again. And so it's just a racket. It's just a racket for contractors, for developers, for like international developers who come to a city. That's like the reason why everything looks the same. And they just come and they just build these things, and then like, they sit empty. Like one that we were really critical of, that's kind of funny, down at Civic Center, NEMA. Mm-hmm. Which is this massive thing.
That's
and I
notorious.
I remember when it opened, it had like a whole thing. Like I think they might have had like a resident coordinator who like there was like trips you could take to Reno or something, and there's like a friendship person, and it was designed specifically for the tech industry because NEMA is right next to the Twitter headquarters. And so like the connections between tech and this whole YIMBY thing are really close, because they often want to build these things to cater to like an upper market, like and it's just like, but it's like empty. You know what I mean? It's like, all these things are just sitting empty and they aren't even using them. Like NEMA, most of it's empty, like a lot. So, I mean, what the city could do, the city is really interesting. The city will waste money. The city, before it will house people, they aren't interested in housing people. And there's like a lot of programs where like, DPW will come through with a hot team and the cops and DPH and they'll like harass people to get off the streets. And then they'll make them think they're going to a housing program, but then it just doesn't go anywhere. Something that was happening was they're trying to create these safe camping sites near City Hall. And I don't really know what the strategy is, but like instead of like letting people move into, all the vacant spaces that are all around the city, they're letting them like camp. And I think the amount of money that they're spending is like 3 times or 4 times as much as it would cost to just pay someone's rent, like even market rate rent in a place. So yeah, YIMBY's, and it's crazy because like real close to NEMA, there's this thing called the Hub or on Market in Van Ness, in South Van Ness, and they're just building these luxury condo things there. And the question is, who is going to move in them? I mean, I don't know. It's interesting. Now, the question during COVID has been who's going to move in there. And like, it seems like people are trying to move back or like, go back to normal and just go back to going to their office and stuff. And because I think that Twitter said that all their employees officially don't have to can just telecommute, can just indefinitely like work remotely. So I don't know who is going to move. I mean, I don't know. It's pretty funny. But the thing is, the YIMBY thing is just to always build it, no matter what, no matter the environmental impact, no matter who it displaces, no matter what the waste or the cost, just continually build these things. But they don't care about putting people inside, like people actually living in them. It's like, there's like an empty mall. About the mall. Where 949 Market was. When all of them were doing that. They like did the school. I forget what it was called.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So like right where that was, they built a mall, like a whole fucking mall, and it's just been sitting vacant for like I think maybe 10. I don't know. When did they finish it? Maybe at least 5 or 6 years. It's been sitting vacant, and if you're gonna let people camp outside in the fucking elements, like let them camp inside the fucking mall. You know what I mean? It's just like, at least they would be, but they won't let people do that. And it's just harder and harder. And it's like, at the same time they're doing all this, they won't, fund anything that will support people, because housing is like fundamental to anything. If you have housed people who don't have to worry about going to work, like, what that does to like you can't hold people hostage and be like, you have to work at this fulfillment center for pennies where you can't pee. Like, you can't do that anymore if people have a fucking place to stay, just have their basic necessities covered. This is like, it's also tricky because I'm not advocating for UBI, because that's like another hustle, because it sounds like what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. So you have to like look like really close at all these things. But for example, like, Andrew Yang's universal basic income thing, that's going to be contingent upon them completely eviscerating all public services. So it'll be like, basically like you would get like, I don't know, like whatever they deem to be sufficient income to live in the Bay Area. Like, that's what you'll get on a monthly basis, but you won't get Section 8 or whatever is left of Section 8. You won't get any kind of assistive housing. You won't get any kind of medical insurance. It's like an attempt to completely gut, I don't know. It's really interesting. I was looking at, for some reason, this really stupid libertarian site, and they're talking about Friedrich Hayek, who's one of the architects of neoliberalism, claiming that like at some point in 1960 maybe, he wrote a paper in support of UBI. And if you think of Friedrich Hayek also later in 1971 or 1975, he published a thing. It was like basically trying to make the point about how social justice is incompatible with the market. So you just have to think that if it's something that he likes, it probably isn't going to be sure, yeah, he would like everyone to like get, because you still have to work at the fulfillment center in order to fucking pay if you like can't pee and you have urinary tract, you know what I mean? Like, you have to do all that shit. So I don't know. People need to be super careful and just to understand that, like, state court, money interests who are continually lobbying are these elected officials. We can't trust elected officials We can't trust them. They're trying to do nothing. Like, just how many people do you know who have come from sleeping on the street to living in a luxury condo? And there's so many of them, and they're building more of them. It's just like, and then people don't want to move here. That's the reason why. So people don't want to move to San Francisco. They don't want to move to metropolitan areas and live in an apartment and spend all that fucking money for a luxury condo when you can just buy a full-on house in the East Bay. So like the housing boom is happening also in the East Bay, like in the outlying areas away from the larger cities. So I don't know. Yeah, it's fuck YIMBYs. They don't care about us. They're a racist, horrible. They're basically, if you think about them, as like an extension of colonial Fayette. Like if you're thinking about how they wanted to slaughter indigenous folks and declare this land theirs and all this stuff, like none of us owns any of this shit. Like let people be whatever the fuck. People want to sleep on the street, people want to sleep in a condo, like in an empty vacant thing. Let people fucking do it instead of like, anyway. So yeah, so YIMBYs don't care about housing people, they just care about building things. Like anything, just build it. That's like all they care about. And somehow it never seems to be any kind of affordable or like no income or low income housing. Like they don't want to ever do that. It's always like, or they'll do a thing where it'll be like, I think it was kind of funny. I can't remember now. Was it Missouri where what's his name? I'm blanking out. The dude who got George Floyd. Missouri, right? Minnesota, right? And then like shit was burning down, and I remember a really early morning, like in a very early point, one of like conservative commentators were trying to say that the riots had burned down an affordable housing building, and that's messed up. They're just doing all this stuff. Who knows whether or not it was discriminate? I like to imagine that it was intentional, that it was an opportunity for people to see something that was going to be a gentrifying force in their neighborhood, and this affordable housing thing was only like maybe 30% affordable, which is just like, out of like how many units, and it's probably like less than that. See, in some areas they'll be like, well, we'll like let so like what they'll do with the early planning process, they'll be like, okay, so we're going to build some luxury condos, but we're going to make like 30% of units are going to be affordable. They're going to be like below market rate, which is actually based off of AMI, which is not like all of us would have to lie on the application and claim that we're earning more in order to meet this getting through the floor of it, of like what the AMI is. So they do that shit, and then later on in the development process, they'll be like, well, we're not going to have any affordable units. Like once the project's been approved, like, nah, we're not going to have any more. And so what they'll do is that the city will charge a fee to opt out of the mandatory affordable units. And so they'll either do that or they'll build some off-site units. So it'll be like the poor unit somewhere else. And it's just all kinds of shiesty shit. And then it just becomes, another payday for contractors, because they get to build two buildings. And it's just it just goes on. And then it's like, and then somehow often the affordable site building just doesn't seem to get built. It just doesn't, whatever, and it'll be some sort of backroom deal where they'll switch the land they're going to put aside for that to build another luxury thing, but then they'll move the affordable thing somewhere else, and it just keeps going, and they just keep doing scams like that, like constantly. So like Vita, which is on Mission and 22nd, next to that really famous dispensary, was built. It's like actually an early example. This is like before even the YIMBYs were even on the scene. But like what happened was the developers paid out a lot of the community organizers not to protest its construction. And the deal was that they would build an off-site thing. And so the off-site thing, I think, was taken over by maybe Meta. But that's like the off-site thing is on Cap and Cesar Chavez, and they finally built it. I think it might be the same building, or I might be completely wrong. I know that they built something over there. It's senior housing, and so I don't know if that was a concession that they made to the developers of the luxury condo building Vita, so it's just like that's an example of it. And it like took, Vita was built instantly. This shit like took, it took like forever. So, and I don't even know if it might never actually have gotten built, because I need to actually research that, but I'm not 100% sure. But anyway, yeah, it's just an attempt to like over speculate everything. Like you see the Tenderloin is like a good example of that. Like the Tenderloin, they've built like tons of luxury condo things, and it's all part of a thing to sort of like basically get rid of black people. Like a lot of it around there has been targeting like, The Tenderloin in San Francisco is one of the few places where, you know, it's like not much of us here, like 3%, I don't know, 4%, maybe it's less per capita in San Francisco, where you can actually see black people in public on the streets. And so they've been really trying to like do different things, like different schemes. Like one of this is like the shystiest one, is the trans district, which people, so the way that it's publicized, like an Out magazine or whatever, or like in Them magazine, is that it was like, you know, 3 black trans women made this thing happen, blah, 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 blah. What it actually was it was a developer called Group I, like an international developer. And San Francisco has wanted to develop the Tenderloin for ages. Like this, you know this, you live here. Like Willie Brown has wanted to get all the area around City Hall, he's wanted to get rid of the Tenderloin forever. And so they were finally able to do it on this hustle of trying to claim that they're going to make this trans district. And like, I work with Gay Shame, and like one of our critiques is that if you have arrived at the point to where they're making a mural about you, and they're trying to create a district about you, you probably are not a factor anymore. And it's really interesting because like there's also like the leather district, you know, and it's like most of the leather bars in the Soma area, that's like the gay sort of leather area, have a lot of them are closed down. Like I think there's maybe one left, 1 or 2. But you know, there used to be dozens, and there used to be, you know, gay leather people walking around, whatever, just people walking around there. And like that just doesn't exist anymore. Like cruising culture, it's all gone. And the conceptual sketches for the leather district, they show, like I think it's called the Eagle Leather. Eagle was the name of SF Eagle was the name of a bar. It's kind of actually a chain of bars. I think there's one in DC too. In the conceptual sketch, people pushing strollers. You know, it's like couples, you know, in a safe monogamous relationship, you know, and it's just like trying to completely clean up the image of it, you know, and they've done all this building construction down in Soma, but nothing quite as crazy as what they did in the Tenderloin. And the Tenderloin is wild. They built a lot of massive luxury condo buildings. Like they've torn down buildings and built these sort of just things, and I don't know, like I forget the names of the projects. There's one of them called Seraph, which is kind of funny. Which I think will have maybe a theater in it. And so, and of course, like none of these buildings are being set aside, like, you know, they're not building these for trans people. Like trans people aren't gonna move in there. You know, they'll maybe have a mural up of you know, Jacob Tobia holding hands with a cop or something, you know, but it's like, it's not, you know, they aren't for trans people. And so people are just seriously delusional, and it's just like, what's kind of funny is that the biggest controversy was that I think that the trans district made a commitment to housing maybe 6 trans people, which is just like, you know, ridiculous. If you know the numbers of people who are unhoused, a lot of them tend to be queer and trans runaways who are living on the street because their parents threw them out. You're going to house 6 of them in a whole district. And it's really interesting the way that the district is gerrymandered. It's right through the quote unquote problem policing areas where there's like lots of people on the street. It goes down 6th Street. It goes up kind of like, and it's just like the Transgender Intersex Justice Project, which is like, you know, Miss Major's thing. Is like a major political force or whatever, like an inspiring, important, necessary, you know, that takes formerly incarcerated folks and sort of helps them reintegrate or whatever. Like, used to have an office there. Since the district has been there, they don't have an office there anymore. St. James Infirmary, which is the sex worker support, like health services and stuff, is like not in the district anymore. It's like there's nothing in the district. it's just a fucking joke. And so they were claiming that they were going to try to house 6 people. They were getting ready to house 1 person, and then they decided, this black trans woman, and then they decided not to house her for some reason. And then it's just like, why are you not, you know? And it's just like, people are fighting over the 6 rooms that are available in the trans district. Does that seem right? It's like, why, when you have like all these massive luxury condo buildings, like you can't put people in there or what, you know? And it's just like, I think it was like for an apartment kind of similar to mine, like maybe inside of an SRO. I can wait a second. A lot of noise. It's like not even a fancy apartment. It's like a place probably similar to mine, like a small SRO room. You know what I mean? And you're just like, and you're fighting over this, and y'all could just, and it's just in the middle of COVID, in the middle of a global pandemic, and it's, anyway. So yeah, YIMBYs ain't shit. That's just, it's all a fucking plot. Don't trust it. There's enough housing. If the techies leave, if the techies want to work remotely from their mom's basement in in New Hampshire rather than come here and complain about seeing gay people, unhoused people, just complain about how dirty this. Just stay the fucking wherever the fuck you are. Just don't even come here. And I guess they can do that now. If you work at Twitter, you can do that now. It's kind of funny. On the global pandemic trip, like there's a whole situation where I think Twitter, which is based in San Francisco, decided to help India ban criticism of their COVID response, which is like, I think they're number 2. It's like US, Brazil, and India, or maybe India is second place now. And it's just like, why? It's like, why are you banning? Like, they're running out of oxygen. They're running out of oxygen, and I think I saw a video. It's like, I think some astronauts just came to or just left the International Space Station and like talking about it. It's like, you have oxygen for fucking astronauts. Anyway, but that's fucking capitalism. Capitalism is bullshit. If it's really interesting seeing how people are figuring out how to make capitalism survive despite like all this evidence that it just doesn't support no one. And I don't know if anyone's gonna watch this video. Probably no one's gonna watch it or care. Because it's like people know shit, how like class and race are connected. People understand that. But there's just so many people who just will stand for corporations to be like, well, Jeff Bezos earned it, I mean, he's a genius. He's not a genius. He's not a fucking genius. He's a fucking robber baron, slave master. It's not, figuring out how to exploit people is like, the entire country, the United States would not exist if it wasn't for that. So it's not he didn't invent it. It was existing before the U.S., but U.S. particularly epitomizes it and took it to a very particular place, a very important and dangerous, terrifying place. So.